Remove your remains!
Hi everyone, I'm Dom Griffin. I'm a film critic and you're watching the Armchair Auteur. This is an ongoing video series I do where we talk about new movies, old movies, screenplay analysis, that sort of thing. If you like film culture and like to see people pick it apart, please consider subscribing. Continuing on with the Spooptoberfest theme, we're going to be talking about a scary movie that just was released. That movie is the new version of Roald Dahl's The Witches, directed by Robert Zemeckis. Before I talk about the new movie, I want to talk about the fact that there is a perfectly good movie based on the book The Witches that already exists. It came out in 1990, directed by Nicholas Roeg, and it's essentially a perfect movie. Like, I didn't rewatch it for this review because it's been some time since I've seen it, but I remember watching it very young, and it was very scary and very formative in terms of giving an entire generation trauma. Nick Roeg created a lot of really frightening and unsettling images that he stuffed into a children's film and got away with it. Angelica Houston's performance is iconic. Everything about the movie. It's like a fantastic, scary, fucked up kids movie, and it's brilliant. But now we have a remake, and generally speaking, I don't like remakes. I feel like if you're gonna remake a movie, you should remake like a shitty movie or like a mediocre movie that wasn't quite all the way there. Because if you're remaking a good movie, there's not a lot for you to really do. It's already a good movie somewhere. You're not gonna like do much better than it necessarily. However, when it comes to adaptations of books, I think it's kind of safe to give it another chance because you have the opportunity to either be more faithful to the book than the adaptation that already exists, or to go in the opposite direction to be even less faithful than the adaptation and do something different and daring with it. Because he's sort of an oddball scoundrel, Robert Zemeckis somehow has managed to do both. Now, this adaptation of Roald Dahl's book adheres a lot closer to the actual plot structure of the original book than the Nick Roeg version does, but it does heavily transpose the actual setting. So the original book and the other movie are set in England and Sweden, and this movie is set in like late 1960s Alabama. It also obviously race bends the two primary characters and, you know, is essentially sort of like a more black version of the witches. Or at least that seems to be the intention. So Luke becomes Charlie, who is played by Jazir Kadim Bruno, with Chris Rock as an older Charlie narrating the entire story, and Octavia Spencer plays Agatha, the grandmother character, with Anne Hathaway slipping into Houston's iconic role as the Grand Witch. The basis of the plot remain intact, with a gang of witches staying at a hotel, trying to turn children into rats using cursed chocolate, but there are minor variations due to setting and tone. Now, to be fair, I want to lead with what I liked about the movie, which is not very much, so that we can try to keep some level of positivity around here. One of the things I liked about the movie is the central relationship between the grandmother and the child in the center of the story. When I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time with my great-grandmother, who was in her late 70s, and we had so much fun together. We used to always go on like adventures and get into hijinks, even though most of those hijinks were just her sort of stunting on the other old folks who lived in her building about how cool her great-grandson was. That said, to me, movies that show young children with like elder, you know, proto-matriarchs always kind of touch me in a different way. In the original film and in here, I really connected to the relationship between the main character and his grandmother. And in this version, most of that is all on Octavia Spencer. It's a delicious performance. She's doing really great work. She does not have very much to work with, but she's a great actress and she delivers a really interesting performance. And all of her scenes sort of feel like they are cut from like a separate movie. Like someone else made like a coherent family drama with her in it, and they cut her parts and shoved it into this mess, which is really great. And like the ending of the movie is kind of hard to swallow. It's more like the ending of the book than the other movie was, but it works in so much as it does work, only because I think of her presence. And if we're talking about acting, I also have to give some props up to Anne Hathaway as the Grand Witch in this movie. Now, she's clearly nowhere near Angelica Houston's level in that movie. Like, she can't touch that. But she's clearly having a lot more fun, and she's really playing around with it and like really kind of goofing off, so to speak. And to be honest, I think I'd much prefer Anne Hathaway as a scenery-chewing goofball than I do her as like a deadly serious actress. She's got a lot of range, and it's kind of fun to get to see that range, even in a movie that I don't particularly like. But the rest of this fucking movie is just not great. So, okay, we're going to start by talking about the first thing that really fucks this movie up, and that is the fact that Chris Rock plays Charlie grown up and is narrating the movie. I get why they chose Chris Rock. Like, his voice does a pretty good job of balancing between like humor and like seriousness, but for this movie, it just makes the entire movie feel like an overlong, uninspired episode of Everybody Hates Chris, and I mean that in the worst possible way. It really takes out from almost every moment that happens in the movie, and at very, very, very few points does it actually enhance the proceedings. It's like the worst voiceover narration I've seen in a movie in a while, and it's really weird for me to have to lob that criticism at Chris Rock, someone I like very much. Also, the overall writing, the screenplay for this project leaves a lot to be desired. Now, the movie has 3 credited writers, but it's kind of a weird situation. Guillermo Del Toro is credited as a co-writer on the movie because at one point he was developing this project to be a stop-motion animation feature. I believe he continues to have script credit because they probably borrowed ideas that he was planning to use in his own adaptation. I don't know for certain if he's the one that chose to transpose the events to late 1960s Alabama, camera, but it does seem like something he would do. However, if he did do it, I think he would have done it a lot better than how it is here, because almost every interview with the people involved with this movie, about this movie, when they're asked why they chose to move things to this setting, they always say like, oh, well, we really wanted to kind of create like interesting ideas in people's minds about how this young black boy has to like distinguish between like witches and regular people, much the way young blacks had to distinguish between which whites they could trust. And that's like an okay idea for a movie, I suppose, but that's not what happens here. Like, they don't explore any of that stuff. It's not touched upon, not even tangentially. It's just like a thing they said in interviews to sound smarter, I suppose. And the other co-writer is Kenya Barris, the creator of Blackish, who has not put his pen to a movie that has not annoyed me in some way, shape, or form since he's moved from television to feature work. I just don't think he's a very good writer in general, and I think that anything he writes always has sort of the same general vibe. And to me, his presence here really lends to that sense that the entire movie feels kind of like a really overlong television pilot. And again, I mean that in the worst way possible. Which brings us to the major reason I don't like this movie, the director, Robert Zemeckis. More people than me have put out videos about Robert Zemeckis' fall from grace. Like Pat Williams did a fantastic video examining his entire filmography and the exact point he stops being a real filmmaker and how much worse he's gotten over the years. So I'll link that in the description if you haven't seen it in the off chance. But watching him direct this movie is a really depressing venture. The central thesis of what has happened to Robert Zemeckis and like why we don't like him or trust him as a filmmaker anymore is that as a storyteller, he no longer seems particularly interested in human beings or people or drama. Like, he no longer seems to relate to real flesh and blood individuals and only seems to be enjoying himself behind the camera when he can focus on creating some sort of unreality through CGI effects or 3D work or whatever different stuff. And it's so obvious when you watch his stuff what he is interested in and what he is not interested in. And unfortunately, most movies that use CG effects like to good use do so within telling a story that doesn't have to rely on special effects. So like, usually you watch a movie and there's effects, and the effects are necessary to tell a specific story and make it believable. Robert Zemeckis like has parts of a movie that don't need special effects, so just regular like back and forth scenes between people talking, and he just like falls asleep behind the camera. And it's just so uncomfortable to watch a movie that's just up and down like this based on how little the storyteller was interested in telling the story. In Rogue's version of the movie, more practical makeup effects were used to make the witches seem uncomfortable and awkward and gross and scary, and he also used shrewd filmmaking techniques to make the entire affair, which takes place all largely in one single location, feel as if the character, you, the viewer, everyone, has slipped through the cracks of reality and is now being exposed to like this dark, gross underbelly of scary things that, you know, exist to terrify people. It worked. Like, that movie really feels like you're going on like an insular journey within this world that you're seeing. For Zemeckis' version, it doesn't feel like that. It just feels sort of like a theme park ride that doesn't have a lot of stops. So once you get to this big hotel and all the characters and everything gets into play, there's scenes where nothing is happening, and then there's scenes where people get turned into mice, and then he clearly has an erection and just cannot wait to show you all the different angles of these CGI mice. It just turns into like a bad like animated movie at times. And then even the stuff with the witches is like pretty interesting and like well realized, but it's not scary and unsettling the way the Rogue version was. It's like discomforting in a completely different way, because you know people aren't supposed to look like that, and it just feels off. And not in a way that's like thematically appropriate. It just feels like what you're watching shouldn't be. You have whole basic scenes of characters talking back and forth, sharing exposition, that sort of thing, and then it cuts away to like someone turning into a fucking chicken and he's just like on it. That's like his thing. And it's embarrassing. It's kind of pathetic to see a guy who's been making films this long and who's made several, I think, very good movies, making movies that are this lame. I mean, I guess if we're being fair, this is a better movie than Welcome to Marwen, but not by a large margin. I watched this movie at noon after getting an entire full night's sleep, and I fell asleep no less than 4 times. I had to spend an extra hour rewinding bits I nodded off during in order to complete this movie, and that was bad. So, as far as I'm concerned, in summation, Robert Zemeckis, retire, bitch. To viewers, please skip this. There's just no need to watch it. It's barely acceptable in the sense that it's on HBO Max, you can stream it from home, but I can't even begin to imagine how much more insulting this movie would have been if I'd watched it in an actual theater. So that's me on The Witches, directed by Robert Zemeckis, who sucks and should go away. If you guys are interested in seeing it, do so at your own peril. I would not suggest it, but thank you for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Hit the little bell icon to get notifications when I put out new videos. There will be more Spooptober videos coming in the next week, so keep an eye out for those, and I hope everyone's staying safe and having a good time. Bye.